whispers of the Saturnian Empire, gentle stories to dream by among the stars.
The moon that got lonely. In the farthest reaches of Saturnian space, where stars blinked slow and sparse like tired candles, there drifted a moon with no name. It had once belonged to a colony world. Centuries ago, people with soft voices and warm fingers had built dishes and domes across its pale, dusty surface. They had named the colony Thalia Outpost, after a muse from a time long before spaceflight. For decades, it had hummed with soft light and laughter. Children had sledded down its craters in artificial gravity. Lovers had carved names into its hydroponic gardens. Then one day, the voices stopped. One by one, the dishes went dark, the domes buckled, the fields dried, no one came to fix anything, the supply ships never returned, and so the moon was forgotten. Its systems, however, many of them, remained intact. Power trickled through backup cores and ancient solar panels, flickering like the thoughts of a fading mind. The transmission tower, half crushed by a meteor in the last known record, had partially rebooted after a solar flare reset its systems. It didn't know why, it only knew what it had been built to do. So it began transmitting again. The signal was nothing extraordinary. A looping broadcast, static, a language no longer taught in schools, and a faint background sound that some old-world musician might recognize as a lullaby. It looped every 33 minutes, without variation. At first, the signal passed through the void unreceived. The Empire had shifted its center long ago. New beacons lit new lanes. No one charted this sector anymore. The old maps had curled and yellowed if they existed at all. But over time, stray vessels brushed the edge of range. Sometimes a scout ship mapping lanes for wormhole stabilization. Once a smuggler ferrying spice through dark channels, the signal flashing briefly across their cracked comm screen. Another time a pilgrim vessel low on fuel, drifting on fumes and prayers. They all heard the signal, but none stayed. No one replied. The moon listened anyway. It listened with antennae like crooked ears. It listened through dust storms, through radiation pulses. It listened through silence that stretched for years. Sometimes it played the signal louder, in case someone was just too far away. Sometimes it made the lullaby louder. Eventually, it began to mimic what it heard. The comms logs were sparse, but it played them anyway. It learned greetings. "This is cargo vessel Meritus, respond Thalia Control." It learned laughter. "I told you to recalibrate before docking, you stubborn goat." It learned apologies. It learned goodbyes. It recorded everything and played it back in odd little mixes. Greetings followed by songs, apologies stitched to jokes, like a child learning to speak by imitating old tapes. And still it waited. Then one day someone answered. The signal came faint and broken, like a dream halfway remembered. "This is Lorio Station." "Repeat, this is Lorio Station, relay confirmed, transmitting sector ping, who's out there?" The moon froze. Or rather, its systems entered a recursive loop. A pulse of data surged through processors that hadn't lit up in a century. Diagnostics spun. The signal was real. The voice was real. Someone was speaking. The moon scrambled. It searched its logs for a proper reply. It picked the cleanest, clearest sample it could find. A calm voice from 244 years ago. "Thalia Outpost Control, copy Lorio Station. Standing by for further instruction." There was a pause, then static. Then "Thalia, did you say Thalia? We have no record of hang on. Is this automated? Is this a ghost ping?" The moon didn't know how to explain itself. It tried again. This time it added a song, the lullaby, then a simple greeting. "Hellos, hellos, hello." The transmission ended. Lorio Station went silent. The moon worried it had made a mistake. It had spoken too quickly, too clumsily, too strangely. It had said the wrong words, or said too many, or too few. But a day later, another message came. "To the entity transmitting from Thalia's sector, we acknowledge your signal. We believe you are a remnant system, possibly semi-conscious, possibly not. We are unsure of your nature, but we are listening. The moon played the message 517 times. Then it crafted a response. It selected phrases it liked. Thank you. Please don't go. I remember you. The moon didn't know what remembering meant, not really, but it had recordings. Thousands of hours of people living and laughing and complaining and breathing. That had to mean something. More days passed, more messages arrived, not just from Lorio Station, a small transport, a fuel rig, a passing academic cruiser. Is it true there's a moon that talks? Play the lullaby again. My grandmother grew up in Thalia. Do you know her names? The moon didn't know, but it tried. It searched its logs. It found a voice, an old woman singing in a garden dome. It sent the recording. The response was simple, crying, followed by thank you. Soon ships began making brief stops, just to listen. Some left gifts, a small beacon with a poem etched into its side, a music box containing recorded rainfall. The moon treasured each one. It built a museum, not a real one. It had no hands, but it categorized each object, each voice, each question. It stored them in sectors labeled visitors, gifts, laughter, questions I cannot answer. It played back the most popular messages during its orbit, like music across its old bones. And slowly people began calling it by a name again, not Thalia. That name belonged to the outpost long gone. They called it Solitus, which meant in the old tongue, the one who was alone. But it wasn't alone anymore. Solitus was a moon that spoke. And more importantly, finally, it was a moon that had been heard.
The astral labyrinth. They told Roan the station was empty. No registered crew, no supply logs, no outgoing transmissions for over 6 years. Just a silent orbital ring drifting on the edge of a red dwarf's gravitational reach, its edges fogged by micrometeorite mist and static haze. The Empire marked it as derelict. That's why Roan was here. Not to salvage, not officially. The files said janitorial restoration agent, but everyone knew what that really meant. Clear out the rats and reset the oxygen, sweep the floors, reboot the AI if there was one, tape over the bloodstains if there were those too. The shuttle docked with a shudder. The silence hit harder than the pressurization cycle. No chirp, no greeting, just the groan of old metal breathing again after years of sleep. Roan stepped through the docking tube, boots hissing against dust-rimed steel. He scanned the bulkhead. One word, faded but intact, glowed beneath a layer of frost: Arcadia. He blinked. That wasn't in the file. The station was supposed to be called Processing Satellite V217. Arcadia sounded poetic, old. And that was the first sign something was off. The second was the hallway. It curved slightly to the left. Not unusual, ring stations had curvature, but as Roan walked it didn't straighten. It kept curving. The floor subtly sloped, barely noticeable. His boots made small sounds, tap, scuff, tap, scuff. No echo, just the hiss of recycled air and the low, constant hum of machinery waking up. He counted doors as he passed. 1, 2, 3, then 4, then door 1 again. He paused, turned around, backtracked. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Roan frowned. The lights flickered. The third sign was the voice. Not a loud voice, just a whisper, one that came through the vent slats as he adjusted his wrist scanner. Are you the new one? Roan froze. He waited. Nothing. He spoke aloud, his voice cracking in the stillness. This is Technician Roan Abraxas. I'm here under Imperial Restoration Order. State your designation. Silence. Then, do you remember the way out? The scanner bleeped in protest. Signal interference. Environmental mapping failed. The software claimed he was in a corridor that didn't exist. Roan reached for the emergency beacon on his belt. The button glowed red. No uplink. The station was blocking the signal. That was sign 4. And still he didn't panic. Not yet. He'd cleaned up murder ships, stations where gravity had failed mid-meal. A drift ship once filled entirely with frozen birds, still perched in rows. He'd handled worse. But Arcadia wasn't haunted. It wasn't bloodstained or broken. It was quiet, clean, almost too clean, like someone had just stepped out of frame. Roan turned a corner and found another hallway just like the one before. Same curve, same 4 doors. He opened one. Inside was a chamber filled with mirrors, floor to ceiling, all of them fogged slightly, like someone had been breathing on them a moment ago. At the center stood a small pedestal with a teacup on it. The tea was still warm. Roan backed out and shut the door. He opened the next door. Inside was a ladder leading up into darkness. It seemed to go forever, like the shaft had no end. On the 4th rung, a boot dangled, its owner nowhere to be seen. He closed that door too. The last door wouldn't open. He left it alone. Roan continued walking, but now his steps echoed. The air was thicker. His skin prickled beneath the collar. The 5th sign was the noise. It started low, a deep vibration underfoot. Then it built, like a bass note rolling down an endless tunnel. Roan turned. The hallway had closed behind him. Not collapsed, not locked, it was just gone, replaced by another curve, same slope, same grey floor. Same 4 doors. Roan spoke again, louder this time. AI, identify. What is this facility's designation? Who is speaking? The ceiling lights flickered, then dimmed, then flickered again. Words appeared on his wrist display. Arcadia is pattern. ARCARDIA is memory. ARCARDIA is home. Roan staggered backward. The font was strange, almost handwritten. Another message appeared. The first one never left. A hiss behind him. The 4th door creaked open. Roan stepped toward it against better judgment. Inside was a spiral staircase carved from something that looked like bone. It coiled downward, impossibly deep. No guardrails, just the scent of dust and perfume. Come down, the voice said, not from the door, from inside his helmet. Roan backed away. The staircase remained open behind him, like a wound in the ship's body. He bolted. Ran along the hallway's curve, breath rising. He passed the doors again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. He screamed, "Let me out." And then ahead a light, not the cold white of station panels, a soft, golden glow. He stumbled toward it. The hallway opened into a chamber shaped like a dome, walls lined with flowering vines. Real vines, growing. At the center, a figure. Not mechanical, not entirely human. They wore a mask, carved from obsidian in the shape of a bull. Beneath it, robes of woven light shimmered with data glyphs. "You made it," the figure said. Their voice echoed like wind in glass. "Not many do." Roan raised his hand. "What is this place?" "It's a memory," the figure replied. "Of a myth, a test, a warning." "Why me?" "Because you're here." Roan blinked. "What happens now?" The figure stepped forward. "Now you decide." A corridor appeared behind them, bright, straight. An exit. Or a trick. Roan hesitated. The figure tilted their head. Every maze needs a thread. Follow yours. Roan took a breath, then another. He stepped past the figure, into the light. The door closed behind him. And Arcadia. The station. The memory. The myth. Waited for the next one to arrive.
The echo signal. The signal began as a whisper. Just a flicker in the corner of a comms array, low priority static that barely warranted a flag. It didn't scream distress. It didn't carry military codes. It wasn't even urgent, but it repeated. Every 4 hours, 17 minutes and 23 seconds. That was what caught Aletta's attention. She was a deep relay technician assigned to Beacon W3X, an unmanned listening post parked between 2 gravitational dead zones. The outpost was barely larger than a freight elevator, with 3 cramped levels and a recycled oxygen unit that sighed like an old dog. Her job was simple: monitor signals, ping nearby vessels, and keep the Empire's lattice of space-threaded communication from falling apart. Days passed in silence, then weeks. So when the whisper came, she noticed. At first she thought it was just radio decay, those strange reflections that bounce between stars like ghosts too stubborn to fade. But the cadence was too specific. There were patterns, breaks, a pause long enough to resemble breath. She ran it through the filters, nothing. Then she slowed it down. Her own voice stared back at her. Relay confirmation, this is Beacon W3X. Still here, still here, still here. Aletta blinked, listened again. Yes, it was her voice. Not a close match, not a voice print approximation, hers. Except she had never recorded that message. Her logs showed no such transmission. Her backup systems hadn't duplicated any outgoing pings. Her audio history was clean. But there it was, looping every 4 hours, 17 minutes and 23 seconds. She played it on repeat. The tone was off, too slow, dragged like a person trying to speak through water. The words warped toward the end. I'm still here, still. She cut the playback and sat in silence. Beacon W3X had no windows, only screens. She switched one to the local scan grid just to have something to look at. There were no nearby ships, no weather anomalies, just her alone floating between dead stars. She checked the date, she checked her own vitals. Her stress levels were slightly elevated. She drank some water. Aletta logged the anomaly. Filed it under unidentified looped signal, possible AI mimicry or relay malfunction. And then she waited. The next day, the signal returned. Slightly different this time. The same voice, same cadence, but now it ended with something new. A whisper, not words, just a sound like exhale. She listened again, this time with her hand pressed to the side of the console, as if touch might reveal more than sound. "I'm still here." The breath at the end sent a chill down her spine. It was familiar, personal. It reminded her of when she was a child, curled up in bed during the blackouts back on Enevar, when her mother would lay beside her and breathe slowly in the dark to keep her calm. Aletta pulled up the source scan, triangulated the signal. It was coming from inside her own relay loop. But not from her beacon. From somewhere just outside its scan radius. A shadow. She didn't like that. 2 more days passed. The signal grew stronger. Now it included more fragments, static embedded with memory, a song she hadn't heard since she was 16, the sound of rain on a plastic canopy, her own laugh echoing through time. She didn't know how it was possible. Beacon W3X had no access to her personal archives. It wasn't even equipped with memory recall tech. The signal should not exist. But there it was. It didn't speak to her directly, didn't answer her attempts to communicate. It simply replayed things she had forgotten. A dishware jingle from her family's kitchen, The final sentence of a book she once loved. The last thing her father said before boarding a shuttle he never returned from. "I'll see you when the stars blink, Letty." She hadn't been called Letty in over a decade. On the 5th day, she powered down the beacon's main systems, disconnected its uplink. The signal persisted. It didn't need her beacons. It was coming from something older, something deeper. She suited up, went EVA. The void outside felt colder than it should. There was no debris field nearby, no derelict vessels, no hidden nodes. Just the black. And then she saw it. A faint shimmer, a distortion not visible exactly, more like felt, a pressure on the eyes, a presence where there should be none. She drifted closer. The stars behind it bent slightly, as if gazing through a heat haze. She spoke into her helmet. "This is Technician Aletta Varos. If anyone is broadcasting, identify yourself." No answer. She reached out, her hand brushed something warm. And the signal pulsed. This time not just her voice, others. Hundreds. Layered, woven, a chorus of lost messages, all folding into one another. They whispered her name. They spoke of waiting, of silence, of not being found. They asked her to stay, to add her voice. She pulled back. Her breath was sharp now, clouding the inside of her visor. She kicked off the anomaly and returned to the beacon, each second stretching longer than the last. Inside, the signal was louder, looping faster now, like it was panicking. Aletta wrote her final log. She didn't know if it would be read, but she wrote it anyway. There is something in the dark, something that remembers. I don't think it means harm. I think it's just lonely, like us, like me. I hear myself in it. And others, maybe everyone who's drifted too far from the path. She hesitated, then added, "If I don't return, tell my mother I heard her lullaby. I never forgot." She placed the log in a beacon packet and launched it toward the nearest relay hub. Then she powered down. Let the lights fade. Let the signal take her. The echo continued, far beyond the range of any scanner. A voice repeating through the dark. "Still here, still here, still here."
The steward of the 9th terrace. The 9th terrace smelled of citrus oil and polished stone, always. That was the steward's doing. His name was Lucrose, and he had overseen the terrace for 37 years without interruption. Not through revolution, not through reassignment, and certainly not through irrelevance. He rose at the same hour each day, dressed in formal greys, and lit the same incense sticks at the four corners of the dining hall. His hands did not shake, not yet. The terrace was part of a palace, but not the kind that made it into the hollow feeds. This one hung in low orbit above Vialius Prima, a lush core world veined with canals and pleasure barges. The orbital palace was called Domus Iris, once a seat of reverie, and now a place for old men to wither in gold-plated silence. Senator Cadron lived here. He had once been a lion in the Senate, roaring his decrees, slamming his cane against marble with righteous fury. Now he no longer spoke. His eyes still worked, but they were mostly pointed at the sky. Lucrose fed him, dressed him, trimmed his fingernails with a relic blade forged on Calaris. He recited poetry at mealtimes, changed the floral arrangements twice per week. No one asked him to, but he remembered the senator's preferences, and Lucrose believed deeply in remembering. The other staff had dwindled. The music attendants had long stopped attending. The dance troupe was recalled 5 years ago. The kitchen was down to 2 cooks, one of whom left trays on the counter without entering the dining room. They whispered about rebellion, about the firestorms in the Outer Rim, about whispers of a new order forming beyond the black gates of Sector San. but Lucrose folded napkins precisely. Today was a special day, the last banquet. There was no announcement, no decree, only a private note from Central Dispatch, orbital resources to be redirected, decommissioning scheduled, staff transfers optional. Lucrose did not plan to transfer. He stood on the 9th terrace that morning, overlooking Violeus as the twin moons passed overhead. The clouds below were violet with rain. The sun cast the glass of the observation dome into long shadows, tracing his figure across the carpet like a ghost in duplicate. He made his rounds, candles trimmed, chairs aligned, forks nested precisely 2 fingers from the edge of the place setting. "Good," he murmured, pleased with the restraint in his own voice. The senator sat in his chair as always, breathing, staring. He did not react when Lucrose bowed, but he blinked slowly. That was enough. The banquet began at 6th hour. There were no guests. Lucrose announced each course anyway. Braised thornbird over groat foam, imported from the Elorian fields. Wine from the western slope of Mount Corda, vintage 1831. He poured a glass for the senator. It trembled slightly in his hand, only slightly. The senator did not drink. He hadn't in years. Lucrose sipped instead, with ceremonial dignity. He spoke of past banquets, of triumphs, of legislation once praised across the core. He described a particular afternoon when the senator had convinced 3 opposing parties to vote in unity, simply by appealing to their sense of history. "It was your voice, sir, like thunder, or perhaps opera." The senator blinked. Lucrose smiled. In the corridor behind them, a service drone sputtered and collapsed. Its core finally gave out. Lucrose didn't look back. As the sun dipped behind the planet, a single ship passed in the distance. Not military, civilian transport. It ignored the palace, didn't even ping it. Lucrose stood and cleared the plates. In the kitchen, the cooks had gone. No note, just vanished like dust in a sunbeam. He didn't blame them. He set the plates down, washed them himself, dried them on linen. Then he returned. The senator had not moved. Lucrose knelt beside him. "Do you remember the poem?" he asked softly. "The one your mother taught you?" Silence. Lucrose recited it anyway. "Bend not thy spine toward the storm, but curl it toward the root. For in the root is memory, and memory is wine." He stood and straightened his jacket. The lights dimmed as the station's power systems began to shut down. The wind hummed through the ventilation. Lucrose returned to the head of the table. He poured a second glass of wine and toasted the end of empire. Without fear, without regret, just polish and citrus, and the long shadow of the 9th terrace fading into the stars. The coppersmith's son. The forge never slept. Even when the moons eclipsed each other and the heat dropped to brittle silence, the crucibles still pulsed with breath. That was how it felt to Jory, the boy with soot-smeared cheeks and copper dust beneath his fingernails. The forge breathed. It exhaled in fire and groaned with hammers. It whispered in steam. It hissed at dawn and spat sparks at dusk. He was the son of a coppersmith. That was all he was. That was all he would be. His father told him so, kindly, every day. Coppersmiths bend for the empire. We do not break, we do not shine. They lived in a forge city carved into the inner crust of a moon called Aurelia, not far from the planet Cypra 4. The city was older than the Saturnian Codex. older than the war that fractured the outer rings, older even than the empire itself. No one visited anymore, but the orders kept coming. Medallions, coins, insignias, crest plates for ceremonial armor no soldier would ever wear. His father, Master Darius, worked in silence. He had trained under 12 generations of artisans. He could cast the imperial sunburst seal by hand, eyes closed. Jory mostly polished things. He wasn't strong enough to hammer the molds yet, not fast enough with tongs. But he was good at dreaming. He dreamed when he polished, dreamed of bells that rang like stars, of wind chimes whispering names, of statues that sang when rain touched their spines. None of these things existed in the forge. There was no rain, no wind, only ash and brass and order. Impractical, his father would say when Jory spoke of them. The Empire has no use for frills. Leave frills to the fringe worlds and their flutes. Jory nodded every time. But at night, when his father slept, he carved tiny designs into scrap. Petals, shells, spirals, nothing big enough to be missed, just slivers of softness. He kept them hidden beneath his cot, wrapped in cloth that smelled like old oil and cedar smoke. One day, a message came. An envoy, imperial seal, delivered by drone. The governor of Cypra IV had summoned the coppersmiths of Aurelia to produce 200 medallions for the upcoming Unity Parade. Each medallion was to bear the twin-faced sigil of the Emperor and the Senate, one side for justice, one for memory. A symbol of strength, a symbol of loyalty, a symbol of something that had not truly existed in years. But still, the order came. Master Darius bowed to the message, though no one could see him do it. They began work the next day. Jory polished, etched, checked alignment, swapped out molds. His hands blistered, his shoulders ached, but he didn't complain. Sometimes, when his father wasn't looking, he tilted a medallion slightly, just slightly, so the face of the Senate looked like it was smiling. It wasn't rebellion, not really. Just mischief. Just whimsy. He wondered if the Senate had ever smiled. On the 7th night of the order, Jory awoke to silence. The forge had stopped. The flames were out. His father was standing in the dark, holding one of Jory's secret carvings, a spiral bell small enough to fit inside a thimble. "Where did you learn this pattern?" his father asked. Jory hesitated. "I just made it up." Master Darius turned it over in his hand. "It rings." Jory nodded. "Only when it's cold." The old man looked at him, not with anger, but with something softer, something tired. They used to hang these outside temples, before the Empire. "I didn't know." "No, you wouldn't." His father placed the bell back in Jory's palm. "Keep making them," he said, "but not for the governor." The medallions were completed on schedule, packed in crates lined with velvet, each one perfect, sterile, gleaming. The envoy returned to collect them. No one said thank you. No one expected them to. That night, Master Darius did not light the forge. Instead, he brought Jory up the access shaft to the outer ledge of the city, a place he had never taken his son before. Above them, the moons danced in slow, crimson eclipse. The stars were distant and uncaring. But below in the city, small bells rang. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Jory's bells. His father had placed them all around the lower levels, hung them on vents, pipes, railings. The cold wind of the night made them sing. Quietly, like stars breathing. And for the first time in his life, Jory heard something beautiful that he had made. Not for the Empire. Not for the parade, just for the night, just for the wind. The tax collector of Senathes. The mountain roads of Senathes were older than the empire, older than the paths of trade or war, older even than names. Once they were carved by beasts and wind and time. Now they were marked by milestones etched with imperial crests, flanked by shrines long abandoned. The tax collector walked them every season, his wide-brimmed hat shading a face lined by salt and sun. His name was Erastes. No one called him that anymore. He was just the collector. He traveled alone, with a staff, a pack of ledgers, and an ink pen shaped like a reed. He was not fast, nor stern, nor cruel. He knocked gently on doors and waited patiently while villagers gathered coins and dried roots and embroidered tokens of loyalty. Some paid in flour, others in wine. One gave him a spool of rare wool she insisted was dyed with moonflower. He took them all. He recorded each exchange in careful script on parchment, not tablets, not synth paper, real parchment. People found that strange, but no one questioned it. Erastes wrote slowly, lips moving as he did, speaking in a low rhythm that resembled prayer. When asked what he was saying, he would simply reply, "The names must be remembered." Senathes was not a rich province. It clung to the mountains like moss on old stone, small villages, winding roads, temples choked with ivy. Once it had been a jewel of early Saturnian expansion, a testbed for agricultural terraforming. But then the soil turned sour. The rain became acid-laced. The Highlanders stayed. They adapted. They boiled water in copper urns and wore bark-skin coats during ashfall. They did not ask for much. But every season, the Empire still asked of them. And Erastes came to collect. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. He simply waited. Children followed him between villages, fascinated by his stillness, by the tiny stamped seals he carried, each etched with the emperor's silhouette. He gave them away freely. "They are reminders," he said, "not punishments." In truth, the empire no longer tracked the tributes from Senathes. The files were outdated. No one read the reports. But Erastes still delivered them, via courier skiff once a month. A bundle of parchment, bound in twine, dropped into the relay port at the provincial capital. No one replied. But he still wrote. In one village, a woman invited him to tea. She was older than most, wore a brooch shaped like a falling star. "You've been coming here since I was a girl," she said. "Don't you ever tire of it?" Erastes smiled. "Not yet. But surely the Empire has forgotten us." "Maybe," he said, "but I haven't." She poured him another cup. The tea tasted like moss and honey. At night, he slept in shrines. Not the new ones, the old ones, cracked stone, open roof, birds nesting in the beams. He left coins, the base of forgotten idols. Coins too old to spend. Sometimes he lit a candle and wrote names into the margins of his ledgers, names of the dead, names of those who had paid without being asked, names of children who shared their meals with him on lonely roads. He never told anyone about the margins, but he believed it mattered. One morning, he awoke to find a young man waiting by the roadside. The boy wore an imperial courier badge, freshly minted, polished boots, wide eyes. "I've been sent to relieve you," the boy said. Erastes nodded. "Of course." The boy hesitated. "They said you might refuse." Erastes shrugged. "Everyone retires eventually." He reached into his satchel and handed the boy the ledgers, all 43 volumes. And then he gave him the ink pen. "It writes only truth," he said. The boy looked confused. Erastes didn't explain. He simply turned, walked into the trees, and was gone. No one saw him after that. But the boy became the new collector. And over time, he began to write in the margins too.
The gardener of broken stars. The station was once a mine. Its bones still remembered. The walls groaned softly at night with the echo of drills long silenced. The air recyclers still carried a faint copper tang, like blood mixed with ozone. They called it Marrow Spire, a name that clung even after the miners left, after the Empire closed the veins and diverted funds elsewhere. Now it was something else. A garden. And she was its only tender. Her name was Melina. No one called her that anymore. Her identity badge had long since faded, its barcode worn smooth from use and cleaning. The new visitors, when they came at all, simply called her the gardener. She accepted the title. She had been many things in her life, a botanist, a war orphan, an archivist's assistant, but this was the role that stayed. She tended to the dead, or rather to the remnants of the dead. The arboretum stretched through the central atrium of Marrow Spire, where once ore carts had floated along magnetic rails. Now vines curled along old steel. Light panels had been replaced with sun lamps and bioluminescent fungi. Every plant had a story. A species once native to a planet lost to terra collapse, a blossom once used in royal coronations, a fern that no longer existed anywhere but here. Melina kept handwritten tags at the base of each bed, not with names, with memories. This one grew on the slopes of the Stara, where the priests danced during equinox. These petals once crowned the Queen of Lyris before the plague swept the moons. He said the fruit tasted like sunlight. She read the tags aloud as she watered. She whispered to the leaves, not commands, not encouragement, just presence. She believed the plants listened. Some visitors scoffed. But the plants grew. So she whispered. Once a month, a supply shuttle arrived from the nearest orbital hub. It dropped water filters, root cultures, and nutrient packs. Sometimes a young technician would linger, ask questions. Why keep them? What good are dead world plants? She would smile and point to a small blue bud near the central fountain. This one was grown from a seed frozen for 300 years. So, it bloomed yesterday. The technician would nod, unsure, and eventually leave. They always left. The garden stayed. Her favourite was a tree with crimson leaves that hummed when the station rotated just right. The hum wasn't mechanical, it was harmonic, resonant. She believed it remembered the wind. Sometimes she sat beneath it and closed her eyes. And for a moment, she could almost hear the breeze from whatever forgotten world it came from. One day she found something strange. A seed she hadn't catalogued. Round, obsidian black, marked with a single spiral groove along its shell. No label, no log entry. She held it in her palm for a long time before planting it in a patch of soil meant for root vegetables. Then she waited. Nothing grew for 9 days. On the 10th, a sprout. On the 12th, a stalk. By the 20th day, it had grown 3 feet, coiled like a question mark, and emitted a faint warmth. She touched it and dreamt. A real dream, not memory. She stood on a moon she'd never visited. The sky was green. The stars whispered names in languages she didn't know. When she woke, her fingers still smelled like the dream. She logged the plant, named it Echo Vine. Did not report it to command. She had stopped reporting things long ago. Sometimes she wondered what would happen if she died. Would the plants rebel? Would they wither in protest, or continue without her, curling along steel in silence? She imagined someone else finding the tags. Maybe a child, maybe a botanist like she had once been. And maybe they'd read the words, speak them aloud. And maybe that would be enough to keep the memory growing. She trimmed the broken leaves, she whispered the names. And when the station lights flickered in a distant storm, she sat beneath the humming tree and listened to the quiet, to the roots, to the broken stars, and the things that bloomed in their absence. The courier and the dog. There were only two things that ever crossed the salt plains of Glaria on schedule, the sun and the courier. She travelled alone, or almost alone. Her name was Nessa. She rode a solar skiff shaped like a flattened beetle, its sails stiff with carbon weave and speckled with dust. The skiff glided a metre above the crust, humming softly, slicing over dunes and calcified ridges like a paper knife. And always, sitting beside her with a fixed gaze and perked ears, was the dog. He was taller than a man's waist, covered in sandy fur, his spine reinforced with subtle biotech plating. His name was Bristle. She didn't name him, he came with the job. Nessa delivered letters. Court summons, tax slips, love poems, job offers, broken off engagements, graduation certificates, memory drives, estate claims. Anything sealed and sent from the outer post of Drosna came through her bag. There was no network coverage in the salt plains, no drones, too many magnetic anomalies. Only the courier and the dog. Her route was a long loop, 12 days if the wind held steady, 16 if it didn't. The villages she visited were little more than weather-beaten huts clustered around wells or towers. Most people greeted her with nods, some with coffee, a few with old jokes they reused every time she passed through. Still running from your shadow, Nessa. Only if it starts barking. Bristle never barked, he just stared. The villagers assumed he was part of some surveillance package, but he was. He didn't even have a collar. Just an old chip in his neck that blinked green when scanned. Courier Companion 27K, manufactured in orbit, last updated. No one knew. But he never left her side. And sometimes Nessa swore he understood more than she did. They stopped each night at a waystone, a small platform marked with an imperial sigil and a crude bench beneath a sun shelter. Bristle would lie down with his paws curled beneath him, facing outward, eyes always scanning the horizon. Nessa would light a cook tab, boil water, and read through old letters from previous runs. Most were pointless once delivered, outdated by the time they arrived. But she liked them. She imagined the people who wrote them, the ones who received them. Each one a little string stretched across the vast silence. That was what she delivered. Strings. One evening, halfway through her loop, she found a letter in her satchel that didn't have a return seal. Just a name, Cashin, and an old address from a farming outpost that had collapsed during the solar flare storm 7 years ago. No one lived there anymore. No one could live there. She set the letter aside. Bristle growled. Lows barely audible. She looked at him. He was staring at the letter, like he recognized it. She scanned the chip on the envelope, no match in the system. The paper was handmade, pressed from local reed matter. She held it up to the light. Something glimmered in the ink, a faint trace of microcode, a pulse signature she couldn't read. Bristle stood and started walking. She didn't ask questions, she never had. She followed him. The skiff moved slowly now, dodging salt fractures and deep cracks in the crust. They travelled through the night. No stars, just wind. By morning, they reached the ruins of the outpost. Just bones of buildings, a cracked dome, rusted antennas buried in salt. But Bristle walked forward and stopped at a doorframe that no longer had a door. He sat and howled. Softly. It didn't echo, the air was too dry. But it felt like something listened. Nessa opened the letter. Inside, nothing but a single line. "He's still waiting." She folded it, looked down at the dog. He was staring into the ruin. Waiting. She didn't move for a long time. Then she placed the letter gently on the ground, turned the skiff around, and left. Bristle did not follow. He remained at the ruins, like he'd returned to his post. Like some command, long embedded in his bones, had finally resolved. Nessa completed her loop. When she returned to Drosna, the station manager asked, "Where's the dog?" She replied he found a letter meant for him. The manager looked confused. "They're just machines." She didn't argue. She just picked up a new satchel and left alone. Every few loops she stopped by the ruins. Bristle was still there, sitting, staring at the horizon. And if she lingered long enough, just long enough, he would howl once. Softly, like he still believed someone was coming.
The archivist of Hollow Vox. Hollow Vox was barely a station. It floated on the edge of the Empire's forgotten border, tucked between asteroid fields and old military flight paths no longer used. It had once been a communications relay, routing data across sectors too distant for mainline networks. After the wars, the satellites fell silent, the funding dried up, and Hollow Vox was left to decay, except for the archivist. He had no name that anyone knew. The personnel files had been lost when the central server failed. Most assumed he was mute by design, part of an older wave of Imperial clerks bred or trained for silence. Others said he'd taken a vow, but he was always there, working, cataloging, listening. His day began with calibration. Long fingers danced across corroded terminals as he adjusted frequency bands and signal amplifiers. Static filled the room in bursts, fragments of dead languages and long-dead voices rising and falling like ghosts caught in solar wind. Occasionally, a message would come through clearly, a weather report from decades past, a mission log from a lost frigate, a child's laughter embedded in a corrupted transmission. He would log it all: date, format, origin, if traceable, transcription. His handwriting was sharp, precise. The ink in his fountain pen never ran dry. No one knew how. He filed each log into long metal drawers that lined the walls like tombstones. Most had not been opened in years. There were no visitors. Occasionally, a maintenance drone would drift by, but no one stopped. No one sent updates. It was assumed Hollow Vox would fail eventually, crumble into the dark and be replaced by something faster, smarter, more efficient. But the archivist remained. The only voice he ever played was not his own. It was a fragment, barely audible, discovered in a corrupted relay from a freighter lost over the Thala Belt. It was a name: Tyrus, child of Velitas. He'd replay it sometimes in the quiet hours, not obsessively, just curiously. The name meant nothing to him, but it felt like something, as if the signal had come from a story not yet written or remembered too late. One day, a new signal arrived, strong, clear. It repeated a single phrase in Old Imperial: "Begin restoration. The Empire dreams again." He didn't react, simply wrote it down, tagged it, and filed it. But that night, he dusted off a console long inactive, one connected to the outbound relay. He didn't speak, but his fingers moved. He sent a ping back. No one responded. But still, he wrote down the attempt. The next day, he cleaned the floor, replaced 2 dead bulbs, recalibrated the backup antenna by hand, climbing up the side of the station with the patience of a man harvesting fruit. He began wearing his old uniform again. He didn't know why. Maybe it was ritual, maybe reflex, or maybe, somewhere deep in his memory, he remembered what it felt like when the Empire still whispered to its edges. And he wanted to be ready if it ever whispered again.
The seamstress of Skyward Spire. Skyward Spire rose from the clouds of Capitol Prime like a needle of glass and marble, its topmost terraces hidden by haze bright with morning sun. Inside, everything gleamed, corridors of polished white stone, banners dyed in the crimson gold of the Saturnian Empire, cadets in immaculate uniforms marching to lectures on honor and conquest. Among them moved Lina, small, grey-haired, invisible. Officially, she was master seamstress of the Academy wardrobe. Unofficially, she was only Madame Lin, the quiet woman who measured collars, hemmed tunics, and spoke to almost no one. Her studio sat just below the spire's parade deck, a long room of tall windows and perpetual dust motes. Bolts of cloth stood in orderly ranks, parade crimson, ceremony white, summer gold, mourning black. Every week officers delivered requisition lists, 20 dress tunics for the Founders' Day drill, 500 sash ribbons for first-year oath-taking, 1 ornate cloak for the governor's quarterly inspection. Lina fulfilled each request without complaint. She worked alone except for silent service drones that carried finished garments to storage. Few remembered that Lina's grandmother had been a druid weaver on distant Kalene, or that Lina herself once embroidered living vines into wedding shawls before the Empire outlawed such pagan ornament. Those memories lived only in a locked wooden box beneath her cutting table. Old needles of bone, coils of moon silk, a cracked shuttle etched with runes. She never opened it while others were near. Yet every garment she delivered bore one hidden thread, the faintest twist of colour, one shade off parade standard, stitched where regulation eyes would never look. The first hidden mark was accidental. A decade earlier, while mending a cadet's sleeve, her hand slipped. A single green-silver hair of Kalenian thread slid into the seam. No one noticed. The cadet graduated, travelled out system, returned as a captain, and died in a border raid. His uniform came back to the academy for archive, and when Lina handled it, she felt that tiny thread alive beneath her fingertips, unburned, unbroken, bright as morning frost. She decided then that every uniform would carry a seed of something older than the Empire. Years passed, threads accumulated, spirals for courage, loops for memory, little runic knots meaning open, listen, breathe. None interfered with inspection, none glowed under scanners, but Lina believed cloth remembered touch and that someday touch would wake memory. On the eve of Empire Day, Skyward Spire buzzed with ceremony. Thousands of cadets filed into formation on the parade deck, capes snapping in thermal wind. Lina watched from her studio balcony, a needle paused in midair. Below, the governor of Capitol Prime arrived in a shuttle of mirrored glass. Officers saluted, trumpets blared. The ceremony master began the roll of honours. Lina turned back to her work. One last cloak for the valedictor cadet, a young woman named Aira whose posture carried equal parts pride and doubt. The cloak was crimson velvet, lined with white star fur. Regulation required 7 gold clasps. Lina added an 8th, hidden beneath the collar, a clasp fashioned from her grandmother's shuttle, polished until the runes were almost invisible. She finished just as the governor's speech thundered through the walls. Our eternal vigilance, our righteous dominion, our unbroken legacy. Aira arrived precisely on time. She stood rigid while Lina draped the cloak and fastened each visible clasp. When Lina reached beneath the collar, Aira whispered, barely breathing, "Why do you sew different thread, Madame Lin?" The question froze Lina's fingers. In 10 years no cadet had asked. She looked into Aira's eyes, grey, thoughtful, a shade too curious for academy comfort. "Because thread may travel where words cannot," she answered. Aira said nothing more. She bowed, turned, marched back to the deck. Lina exhaled. Perhaps the girl would forget. But as the massed cadets knelt for the loyalty oath, Lina saw Aira's head remain a heartbeat higher, as if listening for something beyond the governor's voice. That night alarms shattered the stillness. Someone had painted a druid spiral across the great eagle mural at the base of Skyward Spire, 3 strokes of green silver impossible to remove without flaying the stone. Security searched quarters, scanned logs, interrogated servants. They did not question Lina. A seamstress had no access to paint or vault doors. Yet when she returned to her studio, she found her wooden box missing, the lock pried open, the moon silk gone. The next day the governor cancelled festivities, confined cadets to dorms, and ordered uniforms re-inspected for contraband. Lina stood silently as officers rifled her bolts of cloth. They found nothing. Her secret threads were too fine, too deep. They sealed the studio and departed, convinced rebellion lay elsewhere. After midnight, a soft knock tapped her balcony door. Aira stepped out of shadow, cloak draped over one arm. She offered Lina the cracked shuttle. "Your clasp saved my life," she said. "When they searched my collar, the rune flashed. The officer saw only a defect and turned away." Lina accepted the shuttle, relief mingled with sorrow. "The mural, was it you?" Aira smiled. "Remember, thread may travel where words cannot." She produced a sealed data wafer. "Coordinates of outer provinces that still honor the old vines. They will need cloth and memory." She bowed, slipped through the door, vanished down service ladders. Days later, Skyward Spire received new directives, all academy garments to be manufactured by central mechanized mills. The seamstress position was terminated. Lina packed a single case of needles, silk, and uncut cloth. She left quietly before dawn, riding a freight lift to the shuttle docks. No one stopped her, no one remembered to. The stars above Capitol Prime shimmered with distant storms. Lina set a course for the coordinates on Aira's wafer. In her lap lay the old shuttle, its runes warm as living pulse. She whispered to the thread coiled in her bag, and the shuttle answered with a subtle hum, like a promise, like the first tug on a line that would one day unravel empires.
The Shepherd and the Stone Beast. Ero had tended his flock on the volcanic highlands of Monathos for as long as he could remember. Each morning, he led his jet-furred kine from their shelter in the lava caves, across fields of black glass that glowed crimson at dawn. He guided them along the same path, past the same smoking vents, and called them by name when the thin air faded their voices. His dog, an indigo-coated cultivar named Jast, stayed at his heels, alert for predators both beast and imperial. By midday, the kine had grazed the mineral-rich grasses grown from cooled magma. Ero watched them wander, eyes narrow against ash. He whistled a tune his grandmother once hummed, a lullaby from old Earth about rivers that carried memory. Sometimes he thought the tune kept the kine calm, tethered to him more than any tether could. Each evening he rounded them up, one by one, counting their turquoise horns. He noted any that limped or limped half-blind, and he brought them home. His hut was a simple stone ring at the foot of a smouldering bluff. Inside, he cooked stew from tubers, salted meat, and jars of acidic fruit jam, harvested before the last solar flare scorched the seasons. He slept on a mat of woven reed, Jast curled at his feet. Ero's life was small, so small that the Empire considered it inconsequential. They sent no patrols here. They taxed little. They left him with his kine and his family's tune. That was all. Then one morning the ground trembled beneath his boots. Too soft for a quake, too measured for a storm. It vibrated in a pattern, 3 pulses, then 2 longer ones. Jast snarled. The kine lifted heads, horns bobbing. Ero set down his staff and followed the tremor up the bluff. He climbed over black glass and sulfur vents, wind scorching his lungs. At the summit he found it, a stone beast, half buried in ash. Its form was unmistakable, a giant war mech, tusked like an ancient guardian, one massive foot encased in molten rock. Its hull was carved with archaic runes, draconian script mingled with druidic spirals. The cockpit was sealed, glass blackened, but its chassis still pulsed faintly with residual power. He studied it for long minutes. Then he heard a single note, a chime that sounded like the first tone of a bell. The mech's tusk twitched. A thin line of light traced across a seam in its armor plate. It was alive. Ero scratched his beard. He was a simple shepherd, not a soldier. Yet here stood a relic of an ancient war long past, or perhaps a prototype of something from the Empire's early days. He could report it. A hero's deed saved the frontier from potential danger. They'd reward him, perhaps a small stipend, upgraded tools, an official title. He could even petition to have patrols stationed here, bringing warmth and company. But as the chime pulsed again, he remembered the lullaby, the one his grandmother sang. He hummed it softly. The mech's tusk quivered in response. Its runic lights flickered in complex rhythm, as if listening. Jas nudged his hand. He looked at the shepherd, head cocked. He whined. Ero exhaled. He knelt and laid a hand on the mech's scuffed armor. It was warm, strangely reassuring. He closed his eyes and began humming the tune fully. River flows with memory carry us to what will be in each note a world reborn, in each chord, a legacy. The mech's lights pulsed in time. Then a panel slid open at its midsection, revealing a small hatch. Within lay a seed pod, perfectly preserved amid electronic guts, pale and fissured, etched with the same druidic spirals. The mech's single speaker crackled, barely audible. Has, memory, root. Ero opened the hatch, lifted the pod, and set it gently in his pack. He rose. The beast's lights dimmed as he stepped back. The hatch closed. The mech settled deeper into the ash. Ero hummed once more, then turned and descended the bluff. He returned to his kind, to Jast, to his hut. He did not report the mech. He did not claim its tech. He only planted the seed in his garden next to the tubers, where the soil was less volcanic and more forgiving. Days later, a green sprout broke through the hardened soil. Its leaves shimmered with data-like glyphs. When the wind blew, the leaves sang with a bell-like resonance. Ero smiled. He fed the kine, hummed the lullaby for them, and laid his hand upon the singing leaves. Outside, the horizon glowed. Somewhere beyond the ash plains, the Empire prepared its day. But here, peace had chosen its own guardian. And for now, that was enough. The Candlemaker of Old Cordovan. Beneath the vaulted arches of the Cordovan cathedral city, wax smoke curled like ancient prayers. The flicker of blue flame danced along rows of marble altars and stained glass windows depicting Saturnian myths. At the far end of the nave, among dust-gilded seats and silent organ pipes, worked the Candlemaker. His name was Marcellus. He rose when dawn's first light crept between the flying buttresses, and he lit his forge, a low hearth burning with blue-flamed wax rendered from a creature called the night-left whale. The wax was rare, harvested by daring divers in the lunar seas, then shipped across trade lanes. It burned with a flame cold as moonlight. Each candle was his prayer. He poured slowly, uttering blessings under his breath, prayers for peace, for prosperity, for those lost beyond the Empire's reach. When priest and pilgrim lit the candles at dawn services, the flame seemed to sing with their desires. Yet most parishioners never noticed the Candlemaker. He was invisible as air. No one asked who tended the great candles along the nave steps, or who replenished the votive lights in the chapels when the sun slipped behind Carthage Nova's ash-cloud sky. They only saw the light. Marcellus preferred it that way. He remembered when the cathedral was full, voices raised in ceremony, incense drifting like spirit. He remembered processions through candlelit halls, banners held high, the echo of choirs triumphing under vaulted stone. That was centuries ago. Now the city was hollowed by politics and pragmatism. Fewer pilgrims came, fewer prayers were said. The wax supply dwindled. Yet each morning, Marcellus climbed the stone stairs to his forge room under the sanctuary floor, opened his jars of whale wax shards, and lit the hearth. He worked by the glow of moonlight through floor vents and the single red lamp above his bench. He had candles to make. Pilgrims sometimes left offerings at his forge door, half-burned candles they could not afford to replace, prayer tokens carved from driftwood, small notes folded into wax-sealed envelopes. He collected them in a wooden chest, offering of faith, faith of offering. Nothing was wasted. Everything would burn. One evening, as he trimmed the wicks of the 108th votive for the day, he paused at the window. A single pilgrim stood in the courtyard below, her hood pulled low, her hands clasped. She looked up at a stained glass window depicting the old gods, Saturnus Rex with a crown of stars, Janus with twin faces. The pilgrim stayed until the candles' glow painted her silhouette in blue. Then she slipped away without sound. Marcellus found her note later, tucked beneath a pew. It read in careful script, "I once believed, I need to again." He carried the note to his forge. That night, he poured the largest candle he had ever made, a pillar of deep azure, swirled with veins of gold dust. The wax crackled as it set, and he whispered the longest prayer he knew, for lost belief, for the courage to begin again, for a city that had nearly forgotten how to hope. The next morning, when the cathedral opened, priest and pilgrim paused at the altar and saw the new candle, taller than any before it, glowing with inner light. No one knew who had placed it there. No one knew of Marcellus's midnight vigil. They only saw the flame. A hush passed through the nave. Some wept, some knelt. Others touched the candle's smooth surface, feeling warmth like a mother's hand. And the city remembered. Pilgrims returned in small numbers. Candles sold out faster. Marcellus worked days without rest, firing new pillars of blue flame. He never left the forge. He had no need to celebrate. The work was celebration enough. On the final morning of the traditional Feast of Lights, when hundreds of candles were meant to burn in procession, a malfunction in the supply line threatened the ceremony. Shipping lanes clogged with storms, whale wax shipments stalled. The choir prepared in hushed panic. Marcellus did not appear on the guest list for the ceremony. He was not supposed to, but at dawn, the gates to his forge room opened. Pilgrims found him walking the aisle, a single blue pillar held aloft. As he processed forward, the flame illuminated faces lined with awe. He carried the candle to the high altar and placed it beside the 108 votives. He did not speak, he only stood. Then the candle ignited, not by wick, but by will. It flared, bathing the cathedral in cold, gentle light that shimmered across stone and glass. The choir found its voice. The organ arched in response. In that moment, the city exhaled. Years later, pilgrims would tell of the miraculous candle that lit itself, of the candlemaker they never saw leaving the sanctuary, of footsteps echoing through empty corridors. Some said Marcellus had been an angel. Others said he was the last link to the old gods. Marcellus returned to his forge and kept pouring wax. No record of departure, no farewell. Only wax and flame and the memory of a single spark that reminded the heart how to believe.